Genesis chapter number 39, verse number 1 says, "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph. He was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand." Genesis 39, we see this story, very familiar story of the life of Joseph, and we're going to see how that Joseph conducts himself really when he's on his own. You think about it, and I wasn't even planning on mentioning this, but let me just say it. You think about your own children, those that have grown children, they're in your house for 18 plus years, sometimes a little longer, and they, there's testing, but they're still at home. Then when they go out on their own, they have to make their own decisions. They have to make their own way. They have to make decisions. Hey, am I going to do this or not do this? I'm no longer under mom and dad's roof. And now they're on their own. In Joseph's case, he's put out on his own kind of early. And it's not necessarily because he decided to. It's because, in his case, he's sold into slavery. And this young man is going to face temptations and trials. And if you know the rest of the story, he's going to do so conducting himself very well. He's going to face temptations. In 1 Corinthians 10:13 says this, "There hath no temptation taken you, but it is such as is common to man. But God is faithful." That's very important. But God is faithful, "who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it." And the Lord makes a way of escape in the times of temptation, these kinds of temptations. And we're going to see that Joseph is going to do so. He's going to do so well. He's going to do so well. Genesis 39, we see here that Joseph's plight in verse number 1. He's brought down to Egypt. He's sold as a slave, and he's purchased by Potiphar. Don't let that name escape you, because Potiphar is going to play a very key role in all of this. And I think sometimes we overlook some details that are very telling about Potiphar in this situation. And with the Lord's help, we hope to maybe mention that before we close this morning in Sunday school. So Potiphar here, he is an officer of Pharaoh. And another important detail is he's captain of the guard. This places him in a position where he is over the security of the Pharaoh. He's over the security of over the king. He'd be in the equivalent, and I don't know what the proper name is. I should have looked this up. But he'd be the equivalent of whoever's in charge of the Secret Service detail of the president. That's what he is. He's captain of the guard. He's an Egyptian. And notice that Joseph prospers in the house of Potiphar. Now we know the Lord's behind this. He's behind the fact that Joseph's going to prosper. But again, Joseph is also plays a part in this because of Joseph's conduct. So he's in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard here. Potiphar's an Egyptian. And again, as we said, don't miss the detail. He's captain of the guard. Potiphar is in that position of security for the Pharaoh. And Joseph is in his house. Joseph also, we see in verse number 2, that the Lord was with Joseph. And he was prosperous. Now this truth will follow Joseph not only here, but also later in everything that he faces. Verse number 9 of Acts chapter 7, it says, "And the patriarchs, moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt." Now those patriarchs are the brothers of Joseph. And so they were moved with envy, sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him and delivered him out of all his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. Now, you know the rest of the story. You know what's going to happen. But again, it's because the Lord is with Joseph that no matter what comes Joseph's way, he's going to be successful. But you do understand that, yes, the Lord's behind it, and there's a reason why the Lord wants him to be successful, but also Joseph's reaction to the situation is important. And maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself, but in all the things that's happened here, you're going to see that Joseph doesn't show bitterness. He takes it and deals with it. And that's very key. He's going to, now think about this. He's sold into slavery. Later we're going to see that he's going to be lied about. He's going to be thrown into prison. He's going to be forgotten. And in all these things, it would seem, if he did, he dealt with it. He didn't get bitter. He didn't grow cold on God. And the Lord rewarded him for how he took the temptations and the trials. Now, Christian, again, maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I want you to think about these things this week, next week, possibly the next week. Joseph's a powerful character, as we said last week. Do not miss the practical in all of this. Now, there's a lot of prophetic. There's a lot of pictures. But don't miss what we can learn from the life of Joseph. Now, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord made sure that he was taken care of. Verse number 3, we see that Joseph's master, and this is important, Joseph's master, according to verse number 3, saw that the Lord was with him. And he also saw that the Lord made all Joseph that he did was to prosper. And Potiphar took note of that, and because he took note of that, he said, hey, I'm going to give you more responsibility in my house because everything you do is perfect. It's like the owner of a company going, hey, I want Bill to do that because I know it's going to turn out great. Hey, he's my star employee. Hey, let me give you something else because I handed you this. I didn't even think about doing that, and you did that. You made it better. Let me give you something else to do because, hey, put him on that project because I know if I put him on that project, it's going to be handled to the letter. He filed that the way I would have filed that, and I can find it. That's what Potiphar sees in Joseph. He says, hey, everything I hand him, hey, I was making this much at the granary, now I'm making this much because he knew to do that, and the house is prospering. Potiphar sees this and he takes note of it. Acts 4:13 says, now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled and they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus. You know what we see in Acts 4? That the Jews and those that are around listening to Peter and John, they said, hey, we know that they're Galileans, but the way they speak, they don't speak like your typical Galilean. They speak as learned and they've been with Christ. Do you know what we see with Joseph? Potiphar is taking note of how Joseph conducts himself and says, the Lord's with him. This man's, to be so young, he's got wisdom. He's handled that well. There's something different. And apparently, Joseph wasn't silent about his God. And so what does he do? Verses 4, 5, and 6. We've read this, I believe, at least verse number 4, but let's go ahead and read it again. Verse number 4, it says, and Joseph found grace in his sight, that's Potiphar's sight, and the Lord, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. In other words, Potiphar says, hey, I'm giving you everything. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. Hey, I've got work to do for the king. Here, Joseph, take care of this. Joseph, take care of this. I'll give you some servants under you. You're overseer now. I'm going to hand it to you and I'm going to forget about it. Now, you've got to have some trust in a man to do that. Verse number 5, and it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. It wasn't for Potiphar's sake. It was for Joseph's sake. But Potiphar was reaping the benefits. How many companies, how many places have benefited from the fact that the Christian that's there is doing the right work, and the Lord says, you know what, I'm just going to bless it because they're there. How many places have been blessed because of your faithfulness? How many places have not been blessed because of your unfaithfulness? It's a two-way street. Maybe you balk about the boss. Maybe you tear the place down. Well, God's not going to bless that, and then maybe the place isn't being blessed because of you. Maybe if you had the right spirit, maybe it would be a better place. You say, well, maybe you're the problem. Have you looked in the mirror? Have you asked God, say, can I do anything to improve this situation? Improve yourself, maybe it'll improve. If it doesn't, then you're not the problem, but examine yourself. Potiphar is being blessed not because of Potiphar, but because of the man that's in his house. And it says, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. So everything that was under Joseph's care. So apparently Potiphar has fields. I think he's got a business going. Not only is he captain of the guard, but he sounds like he's got other things going on, and Joseph's in charge of that, while Potiphar's busy about working for the Pharaoh. Notice verse number 6, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had. I mean, it's to the point where Potiphar's not, hey, just give me the report every month. Just let me know. How are we doing? But I don't even know, oh, you bought that combine? Okay. Go for it. All right. It balanced? Great. Looks like you made a good decision. Isn't it nice when you have somebody you can just say, you know what, I'm going to leave that with you. Let me know if you got any questions, but I'm not going to worry about it. That's where Potiphar is. Couldn't be better, folks. Couldn't be better. And let me say this. We don't think about it. Joseph had to go through Potiphar's house in order to be governor of Egypt. Why did he have to be a slave in Potiphar's house? It trained him for the future. It trained him to work under a man that wasn't his father. It trained him to work under a condition. He wasn't an Egyptian himself, but God put him in Potiphar's house so he'd be that close to the king's house. Like maybe, just maybe, the king came over. Just maybe, he heard about what went on in the king's house. And it also trained him to deal in business so that one day, when he was the governor, he already had gotten his feet wet, we like to say, in business. You see, the things that happen in your life is not by coincidence. God is training you for the next step. Young people especially, our young men in this room, everything you learn on the job or off the job is a next step. Soak it in, because it could help you to develop for that next thing in your life. We used to do, you do resumes. You know, you qualified for the job. Why? Because you've done something similar. The idea is that, hey, I've learned these things that will help me in the next step. What do you think God's doing here? He didn't go straight from keeping the sheep to running the affairs of Pharaoh's house. He learned it on a small scale in Potiphar's house. And so this was good for him. We see that this promotion, though, obviously the promotion came with responsibility, which is very typical. Verse number 6, we see, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. We've already made this statement, though. We see that Joseph did not serve with a bad attitude, even though he had been sold into slavery. Instead, he worked well. Ecclesiastes 9:10 says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. He did it well. He didn't have a bitter attitude. He didn't have a root of bitterness. Best we can understand. If he did, he dealt with it. And he took care of it. Joseph started at the bottom. He came in as a slave. By the time he left Potiphar's house, he was the overseer. You know what this teaches us? It teaches us that the right way is to learn at the bottom and work up. 1 Corinthians 15:10 tells us, but by the grace of God I am what I am, and His grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. Now I know these verses are before Joseph, but you know what? Joseph acts, how do I say this? Joseph's conduct is a great example for the New Testament Christian, but he didn't have the New Testament writings to follow. Isn't that odd? Maybe he knew the author. Colossians 3:23, and whatsoever you do, do it heartily so as to the Lord and not unto men. Problem is today, we say, well, he's not worth serving. Who? My boss. You're not serving your boss, you're serving the Lord. Right. And if you don't like the place, then find something else and change it. But until such time, do what's expected of you. And do it the right way. Because you're an example. You're a light. And that may be the only light that that person has. That is what a Christian is and what the Bible is. You are an open book. Joseph quickly rose in the ranks of the household staff and became the overseer of his master's house. In type, we understand that Jesus Christ is over all the house of God. You understand Joseph is a type of Christ. We didn't get to go through all those last week because of our lack of time, but you will find multiple examples of pictures of Christ in the life of Joseph. Joseph was over the house of Potiphar. Later he'll be over the house of Pharaoh. We understand that Jesus Christ is over all the house of God. Now, with all this success, you know trouble's brewing. It's like the Christian. You're successfully serving the Lord. This world, the flesh, and the devil is not going to stay too long before they're going to react and act upon your success for your Lord and Savior. Just so in Joseph's case, the devil's got to ambush Joseph. Why? Because Joseph is preserving a line. Doctrinally, we understand, and from Scripture, that Joseph would save the line that Christ would come through. Do you think the devil was going to let that lie? He was going to react, and it's going to come in the form of a woman that has no business casting her eyes upon this young man. And if the devil can succeed, it will destroy the preservation of the line for Christ. Genesis chapter 39, verse number 7. And it came to pass after these things. Well, everything that we've just read, he's overseer, everything's going great. Potiphar just loves this young man. Hey, he's the best thing that's ever happened to my household. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wanteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath into my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Well, the first trial, Joseph passes with flying colors. What does he do? He says, look, hey, whoa. Hey, everything is under my hand except you. You're my master's wife. I have no business touching you. I have no business looking at you. Please, just go. I'm responsible to my master, but more importantly, I'm responsible to my God. He says it as much. You know, Joseph, even in his defense to Potiphar's wife, he says, look, I can't sin against my master, but more importantly, I can't sin against my God. You need to go. And if she would have been, she'd been a respectful woman, she wouldn't have done it in the first place. But if she at least feared her husband and God, she would have said, you're right. I don't know what came over me. But that's not it. Do you know what sin does? Sin tries the waters. And then sin comes back and comes back. And it sounds like, and let's just read this together, notice here, verse number 10, it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. You know what she does? She is trying to wear him down. You know what sin does? If you let it sit there, if it's in your power to get rid of it, you need to cast it out. That might mean just throwing a phone away and getting a dumb phone. That might mean throwing a computer out the door. That might mean driving a different direction, not going by a place. That might mean getting something out of your house. Whatever the case may be, you need to get that temptation and cast it forth. Now in Joseph's case, he's in a hard spot. He's still a slave in the house of Potiphar. He can't just leave. But if it's in your power to get rid of something, get rid of it. Because here's what's happening. She is coming to him. It sounds like when Potiphar's away, maybe he's left for the day, maybe he's on a journey again for the king, she comes to him every single day. Sin is like this. You know, we see that Joseph refused to sin in this situation, but we're going to find that he allows himself to be in the house with her by himself. Now, we've had a lot of, maybe he didn't know. We see this in verse number 11 and 12. Notice, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. That's been important. I've underlined that in my Bible because that's important for us to think about, folks. Are you placing yourself in a bad situation, whether it's a work environment, it's a home environment, whatever the case may be? Are you placing yourself in a bad situation to be alone with someone you have no business being alone with? You say, I'm strong enough. That's your first mistake. You could be strong enough all day long, but what is that person doing? What are they thinking? What are they going to try? You say, well, you don't think nothing. You don't know the person. Maybe you know the person. Maybe you think you know the person. This is why we have got to be thoughtful about our testimony. This is why it's important to consider, how does this even appear? Verse number 12, and she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Now let me say this about Joseph. Maybe he didn't realize the men weren't in the house. Maybe he didn't realize the servants weren't in there. He came in. She knew he would be in there. Likely that's the case. I'll be honest with you. By the conduct of this woman, that's probably the case. Maybe she was over in the corner of a room. And she's like, I know he'll be in here soon because I know his pattern. I know where he'll be at this time of day. Listen, if you got that in your heart, ladies and men too, you better cast that out. You plotting on somebody, you better stop. You're wicked. You're of the devil. So you are. You're acting. Go read Jesus' comments. You have your father the devil. He said that to the Pharisees. You're acting like that, you're acting like your father the devil. So Potiphar traps Joseph. Maybe she gets between him and the door. And what's he supposed to do? And he's trying to tell her to stop. So what does Joseph do? Well, in this case, he can only do one thing. He flees the temptation. Read a couple of verses on this, if you will. You can turn to 1 Corinthians chapter number 6. 1 Corinthians chapter number 6, verse number 18. You know, not only must we do the right thing, but we also need to avoid situations that possibly exist for us to be trapped. But in this case, Joseph, like I said, maybe he didn't realize she was there. Maybe she knew his pattern of work and she went to that spot. So he's trapped, but when he's trapped, he flees the temptation. That's very important. Verse number 18 of 1 Corinthians 6 says, flee fornication. Every sin that a man doth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. 2 Timothy 2:22, and you can turn over there if you like. Verse number 22 of 2 Timothy 2 says, flee also youthful lust, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace, with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Flee. And then let me add this. 1 Thessalonians 5:22 says, abstain from all appearance of evil. Where would you use that? Well, what I just talked about a few minutes ago. What's the appearance? How does it appear to those out there? Are you putting yourself in a situation that could be construed in a bad way? You see, it takes years to build a testimony. It takes 5 minutes to destroy it. That's not popular today because we live in an age of modern Christianity. It's like, well, they're thinking what they're thinking. That's great to throw out there until you're the conversation of the problem. And here's the thing, you can do everything and still get smeared. Because we're going to find out in Joseph's case, he does everything he can to stay out of the problem. And yet he's going to get smeared. But at least do everything you can and lower your chances. You know, as much as possible, we need to avoid the occasions of temptation. However, there are times that arise where conditions and situations may initially go unnoticed, but in these types, when you see it, fix it. We need to obey the Scripture and flee the times of temptation in our lives. So she catches him in verse number 12. She asks him again to lie with her. Verse number 13, it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. Now here's what she does. She capitalizes on a situation. She's grabbed hold of him to the point where his outer coat, this coat that he had, she has it, he has to get out of it to run. But here's the problem. Now his coat is in her hands. This young man's about to be tried with circumstantial evidence. It's her word against his word, and she's got a piece of evidence. Circumstantial, mind you. So what does she do? She falsifies the situation. I've got enough to hang him. The desire of which she had for him turns into hate because he has now told her to her face, I don't care what you do, I'm not doing what you ask. So her desire for him, her lust, because that's what it is, has turned into hate for him. You know what this world does? Happens every day. Someone doesn't do what they want you to do. The desire of which they had is now hate for that person. Verse number 13, we see that again he flees from her face. So what does she do? She decides to use this evidence of proof of what he's done, which is a lie. Verse number 15, it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. What's she going to do? Well, look what she just said in verse 14. This woman's wicked. Because what does she do? It's your fault, Potiphar. Really? Well, let's just say, for instance, for a moment, that Joseph really did this. It's not Potiphar's fault that Joseph did it. What does she do? She throws it in his face. You see what kind of woman we're dealing with here? It's your fault. But she wants to do that so that he will react. He's put on the spot. And because he's put on the spot, he has to save face with the servants and anybody else she's told. Because if he doesn't deal with it, what kind of husband is he? He's put in a hard spot. Well, honey, I mean, are you sure? Of course I'm sure. You question my statement? Are you questioning my truthfulness? You don't think that happened? Listen, this is the man that trusted Joseph with everything he had. Just the thought that Joseph betrayed him is going to burn him. Verse 17. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant, which thou hast brought unto us, came in unto me to mock me. Notice how she worded that. Thou brought into us. Potiphar, it's your fault. The wording tells for itself. She's throwing this in his face. Verse 18, And it came to pass as I lifted up my voice and cried that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, thy servant, mind you, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Now, if you're Joseph, just when you think everything is going well, I mean as well as it can, another blow just hits you in the gut. Okay. My brothers sell me into slavery and I have to go down to Egypt. Then I start working for this man that I think likes me and cares about me, and things are looking up. I went from being a slave to an overseer. I'm still a slave, but at least I have some free reign. Now I'm accused of doing something I never did. And I'm thrown into prison. Lord, what are you doing with my life? What do you want from me? Why am I here? You been there? You're not in prison, but maybe you're in a prison with your mind. Like, what are you doing with me? I thought things were looking up. I thought things were great. What? I'm cast down again, Lord. It's like that. It's like that sailor on the sea of Psalm 107. Joseph, this is all part of the plan. Just trust me. It'll get better, but not yet. You see, Joseph's got to go to the prison house, or else he'll never make it into the king's house.
That's right.
But maybe you're in the prison house. Maybe you're in Potiphar's house right now. And you're thinking, oh Lord, how long? Just trust God. Because God's got a plan. And keep serving Him and be faithful to Him and wait on the Lord. But while you're waiting, you see, waiting is busyness. It's not just sitting there doing nothing. You can be busy for the Lord while you wait for the Lord to reveal His plan. The Lord has a plan, even in the midst of all this. Notice here that the Lord does not leave Joseph in prison without help. Verse number 21, notice again, but the Lord was with Joseph. I thought he went to the prison house. Yep. I'm abandoned. Nobody cares. But the Lord was with Joseph. And showed him mercy. And gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. This man can't stay down. The devil's tried to drown him in falsehood. The devil's tried to tempt him, drown him in temptation, but he just keeps bobbing back up. Why? Because his God's greater. Why? Because He's being faithful. See, all God wants from us is faithfulness. Let Him do the rest. Hey, what are you supposed to be doing? We'll do it. But I'm tired. I know you're tired, but just keep at it, because there's coming a better day. But I'm weary. I know you're weary. Christ was weary on the way to the cross. Say, well, He's God. But He was man too. He bled. But He stayed faithful. There remaineth a rest for the people of God. Verse number 22, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. So the keeper of the prison says, I see in Joseph everything I've handed him. Okay, he started doing this. I gave him kitchen duty, and boy, he cleaned up. He's got a schedule done. He cleaned all that in record time. I think I'll give him something else to do. Oh, look, he handled that. You know what? Hey, I'm going to give you this ward. You're just over it. You're going to let them learn. You're going to do this for them, and you just let me know how things are going, Joseph. What? Yeah, notice. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. He became the overseer of the prison for the keeper. All right, you're my assistant now. Take care of that. All right, yes, sir. We're going to do it. Making sure these guys are taken care of. And you'll notice that with the butler and the baker here in a little while. When we get to there, he's taking care of them. He's checking on them. Why? Because the keeper committed everything to his hand. What? Thought he was a prisoner. Yeah, but he's a prisoner, but he's trusted. He's special. There's something about Joseph's different. And we'll just mention something here in just a moment that I think that there's a reason why, even behind the scenes, that, while he was thrown in prison, part of that was because it had to happen. Notice something. Notice it says here, the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Oh, Joseph, even in the midst of trials, the Lord's blessing you. Do you see that? Folks, and we're about done. We're about done, and we're on time. Praise the Lord. As long as I don't go too long-winded. Listen, can you, even in the midst of your trials, can you stop and think about 5 to 10 things that God's doing in the midst of those trials? Has someone been a blessing to you this week? Maybe in the midst of your trial, maybe they checked on you. Maybe they remembered you. Maybe the Lord just gave you an added blessing. Can you think of something? I've told my wife and I've told my children. I said, look, you may think this is, right now this is, this is going on and this is difficult. Can you stop and think about some things that God has done for you? I found that even when I'm down, that if I'll stop and think, yeah, Lord, that and that and that, okay. Lord, you've been good. That could have turned out really bad and you did this. Or that could have happened and you did this. And you allowed that to be found and that took care of that. Lord, you've been good. Joseph is a prisoner, yet he's got free reign of the prison. It's his house, nearly. Even though he's a prisoner. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. But I want you to notice something here. We see that Potiphar accepts, at least on the appearance, accepts the witness of his wife. Potiphar has to apprehend Joseph and places him in the prison, but to remember that he's the captain of the guard. And notice what prison he went to. A place where the king's prisoners were bound. Do you remember I said that Potiphar is the captain of the guard? Do you understand that this prison is a special prison? Potiphar didn't place Joseph in the common prison. Do you understand where he placed Joseph? He placed him in his prison house. I'll show you something here. I thought when we went through this in the Institute, I thought this was very eye-opener. I never had seen before when I was preparing for Institute many months ago. When we were finishing up Genesis. I thought this was very interesting. Notice chapter 40. We'll read the first 3 verses. I want you to notice this. And it came to pass after these things, that's where he was placed in prison, all those things happened, that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord the king of Egypt. Verse number 2. And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers, and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard. Who's the captain of the guard? Potiphar. Into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And, verse number 4, and the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued to season and ward. Do you know what Potiphar just did? He says, hey, Joseph, these are prisoners for the king. I want you to take care of them. Do you understand? And this is just Brother Jonathan's theory. I've wondered, since studying this many months ago, if Potiphar doubted some of what his wife said. And he says, you know what? I could kill him. I'm not going to kill him. But I have to save face with friends and servants. So Joseph, you're going to jail. But hey, keeper of the prison, hey, just know he was really good for me. So you might want to keep your eye on him. All right. Captain of the guard, Potiphar walks in. Hey, Joseph, I got some very special prisoners because some of these may go back for trial. I need you to take special care of them. And I know you will. Here. So, I think Potiphar had some doubts about some testimony, don't you? Because this is the same man that gives Joseph 2 special prisoners. The Lord's good. The Lord's good. And if we can learn anything from this, in the midst of our trials, remember that God's still working behind the scenes and He's taking care of all things. Let's remember that as we go through our days. And notice that wisdom